I don't have anybody here who's telling me when I'm supposed to start, so I'm just going to start. All right. So this is the hardcore session. For the people who haven't decided to run away yet, or for a few strange individuals who decided to join at this point. We're going to talk about how to customize IG Publisher templates and using HL7's IG Publisher. My name's Lloyd McKenzie. Most of you have seen this slide before, so I'm not going to really talk about it. You can download it from the Firely website when they post the presentations if you really want to know more about me, or just ask. Focus for this session is on HL7's IG Publisher, so it is not Simplifier. It is potentially relevant to those who use Trifolia because it does use the IG Publisher behind the scenes, and you can export Trifolia content and run it through whatever publisher framework you want to. You may have to move some files around a little bit, but my expectation is that Trifolia will soon be exporting files in the way that HL7's official template wants them to be, when HL7 actually has an official template that wants them to be a particular way. Trifolia is pretty responsive like that. In principle, Simplifier could do the same thing and may very well choose to do that at some point, but that's not their current technical direction. We are going to get techie. We're going to play with Ant, we're going to play with HTML, we're going to look at cascading style sheets, because who would not want to do something like that at DevDays? And of course, we'll play with my favorite programming language, which is XSLT, which you don't necessarily have to use, but I mean, why would you not want to? The plan for this particular session was that I was going to tell you everything about HL7's new IG Publisher mechanism and our standardized template that everybody was now expected to use, except that we're not quite there yet. So instead of telling you about what is, I will talk to you a little bit about what will be, but I will also talk to you about what is, which is what we had hoped to be what used to be, but is actually still current. So why would you want to change what an IG looks like? And there's several answers to that. One is that you're not HL7, and therefore you don't want to claim that you are publishing HL7 content. And HL7 would be oh so grateful if you would actually do that, because there's a whole bunch of people who are using HL7's current templates and are not changing the HL7 logo at the top, which makes it look like they are publishing HL7 content when they're not. And we would kind of like you to change that logo to be your logo. And if you want to change the color schemes, you can do that as well. And that's a pretty minor set of changes to do that. The more significant reason to make a change is that the people who are consuming your implementation guide are different in some way from the folks who are consuming typical HL7 implementation guides. Maybe you are producing a whole whack of logical models rather than typical Fire profiles. And the templates that HL7 is currently publishing don't really do a great job of publishing logical models, because we don't really do those, or at least we don't do those yet. And so you might want to tune some things for your particular type of implementation guide or your particular type of audience. Another use case I've heard is that there's a belief that to reference certain things in regulation, you have to turn them into PDFs. If that's the case, then I'm sorry for you, and I'm even more sorry for the developers who have to read the content that you publish, but there may indeed be some circumstances where you need to produce something other than linkable HTML, and you can actually produce pretty darn much anything you can imagine with the IG Publisher if you really want to, including PDFs, although you would probably have to wrap a little bit around the end stage of that to actually do the PDF generation part of it. Another reason is that you frankly think that HL7 couldn't design a user interface no matter how much we paid them, and that's probably true to a certain extent. We've done our best, but we are not ideal folks necessarily to be designing UI because we're coders and coders don't know anything about UIs. And so you might want to make some changes. So examples of the kinds of things that you might do or that have been done is, if I can figure out how to make my machine work, there we go. So the first thing that you see here is the structured data capture implementation guide that we were actually just playing with in the left-hand side of the room. And this is a standard HL7 implementation guide. We've got actually a weird thing where Graham went and added the Fire logo everywhere, even though I already had the Fire logo on it. And so it's doubly Fire now. That was a post-publication change. We got the HL7 logo, we've got the HL7 color scheme, and things look pretty similar to the way that they look in the main publication. This is an implementation guide that I created for some folks in Ontario, and they didn't get overly creative. They changed the logos. They changed the color scheme a tiny amount. They changed the footer so that it didn't say that they should submit change requests using GForge. But other than that, the base way that things look is exactly the same as a standard HL7 IG, because they didn't really care that much. They wanted their logo on it, they wanted a little bit of their colors on it, something that showed that it was not HL7, and that was good enough. I have a different client, and they were not happy with HL7's format at all. They thought it was god-awful, and seeing what they came up with themselves, I can't really argue that they did a better job. They have a nicer color scheme. They've actually changed the widgets that show up. So this particular view highlights only the must support elements and brings in the definitions and the comments into a table-like view because that's the content that they figured everybody needed to see. And while there is available to you a text summary and a differential table and a snapshot table, actually, I think that's zoomed, maybe not. Their primary view is this one. So they actually did a pull request against the IG Publisher to produce this additional fragment view of the content. They did a whole bunch of JavaScript and CSS work to have these nice menus and change this color schemes and change the spacing and change a whole bunch about how the IG Publisher or how the IG appears. But this uses exactly the same tooling, exactly the same process that was used to produce those other two. All that's changed is the framework folder that defines what are the templates and how does all that stuff look. And what we're going to talk about today is how you too can do that if you want to. The way the IG Publisher is set up right now and the way it's documented right now is we don't provide any official templates. We give you the IG Publisher jar, we give you some documentation that says how templates theoretically can work, and we say, go use Jekyll, have a nice day. That's actually a huge amount of work. I personally have probably spent upwards of a month's time putting together and making the IG Publisher framework that I use do what I want it to do. So having section numbers that behave the way I want them to, and tabs behave the way I want them to, and a table of contents that looks the way I want it to, etc. It's a fair bit of effort. And so the typical way that people produce implementation guides using the IG Publisher right now is either they let Trifolia do it for them, or they use either my framework or Eric's framework, which basically means find an IG that looks like you want yours to look like in GitHub, clone it, and then change the source files to be your source files instead of whatever that implementation guide was publishing, and go from there. That is not an ideal process, and we have recognized for the last year that that's far from an ideal process because, first of all, we don't have consistency within HL7 because we've got two different frameworks that look different because Eric and I have different ideas about what IG should look like. But also, each IG has a particular snapshot of that framework, and as the framework evolves, they don't necessarily keep up, and it's hard to keep things consistent, and it's just a pain in the butt for the people who are authoring. So we are moving to a place where the template piece, the framework piece, actually is maintained independently from the IG content. So all of your profiles and value sets and code systems and the textual pages that describe security and use cases and all of that kind of fun stuff will live in your GitHub project. And you will point by a URL or an NPM ID at a different project that contains all of the what should the table of contents look like, and what does the header look like, and what does the footer look like, and is your text black or blue or purple, and all of those other fun things, and that lives separately. And what that means is you can now produce a template of your own for your organization and have multiple implementation guides that all reference that implementation template and look the same. And if there's a change that you want to make in terms of style, numbering, table of contents, whatever, you can update the template and all of your other IGs will automatically change how they render. Obviously easier to maintain and makes things consistent. When we're looking at producing our own implementation guides and using the IG Publisher, obviously you need to have Java installed because you need that to run the IG Publisher. In theory, you can also use Java to write additional processes that run during the publication process, or if you need to make pull requests against the IG Publisher itself because you want it to generate new types of fragments, you're going to need to understand Java to be able to do that. Jekyll, which runs on Ruby, is the static web content generation tool that we use. It actually produces the HTML from all of our different source files and all of the different fragments that the IG Publisher produces. Within Jekyll, it uses a language called Liquid that lets you point to variables, lets you have if-then statements that control the appearance of content in your implementation guide. So as an example, I have embedded in all of my templates some if-then-else statements that say, if somebody has set a flag saying they don't want XML, then don't do this, otherwise expose the hyperlink to the XML rendering of the profile or the value set, and then with a simple flag you can turn XML on or off for your implementation guide as opposed to doing a whole bunch of work. And that's something that Liquid can do. Ant is not mandatory right now. I use it in my framework. Eric does not use it in his. In the 2B framework, it's going to be mandatory, and it's going to be used a little bit differently. Right now, the way Ant works is Ant does a whole bunch of pre-processing on the implementation guide content, then we call the publisher, and then we do some post-processing on the content, but Ant has no access to what happens from the time the publisher starts to the time it finishes. In the new world, the publisher will actually make calls to Ant. So at different stages, it's going to invoke Ant and have it do certain things. Obviously, when we're publishing IGs, our primary focus, at least right now, is producing web-based content, because that's how implementers tend to want to consume their specifications these days. So that means you need to understand HTML, you need to understand CSS, and you're probably going to have some JavaScript in there too, because you want to be able to have widgets that open and close and stuff like that. And then there may be other scripting languages that you will use to manipulate your content. And we don't really care so much what those are. I use XSLT because it's my favorite hammer. Eric uses Python because that's his favorite hammer. You can choose the hammer of your choice. Once we have templates, or what we have now with frameworks, those control a number of things. It controls where are the source files found, what folder names are they in. So when we were working in the last session, for those of you who were at least playing with the IG Publisher side of things, we had a folder called source, and inside that there was a folder called terminology or vocabulary or something, and another one for resources, and another one for page content. All of those folder names are determined by the framework. If you use a different framework, your folder structure can be different, and you can decide how you want to divide your stuff if you want to. If you're using the IGE continuous integration environment that HL7 uses through Git, then you don't really have a whole lot of choice. Your output has to be called output, or it won't publish. But if you're not in that constraint, then you can obviously change that. It controls the general look and feel, so what is in your header, what is in your footer, what is your color scheme, what fonts are you using. It also generates some of the pages, so things like a table of contents or an artifact index, or if you wanted to have a boilerplate license or something else that always shows up in your implementation guides, that can be part of your framework. And then obviously how your artifacts themselves appear. What do you see when you look at a value set? What do you see when you look at a profile?